It all started with a whisper from Brussels. A leak so small it could have been dismissed, but the words inside carried the weight of an economic bombshell. Behind closed doors, Donald Trump standing before NATO allies delivered a chilling demand. Raise tariffs on Africa. Make them bend or watch them starve. The target was clear. Africa's raw lifeblood, oil and gold, to resources without which Western economies would stumble overnight. Trump feared that if BRICS locked these resources, Washington's grip on the global order would shatter. For Africa, the message was brutal. Either surrender sovereignty or face economic suffocation. But in Ouagadougou, the reaction was very different. Captain Ibrahim Traoré didn't tremble. He called it what it was: economic warfare disguised as diplomacy. And instead of silence, he prepared fire. What came next would shake Africa, NATO, and the world itself. The leak was never random. It came from inside the very room where the decision was made. During a closed-door meeting in Brussels, Washington pressed its allies hard, raised tariffs on Africa, cut them off until they returned to dependence. The message was blunt and the targets were clear. Africa's oil and gold, the lifeblood of entire economies, the twin resources without which Western industries would stumble overnight. Most European leaders stayed silent, but not all. Among them sat one who couldn't bury his conscience. He knew what such a move would mean: economic warfare disguised as diplomacy, a new cycle of suffering forced onto millions. Yet speaking out publicly would have been political suicide. So a different choice was made. Late that night, a single page from the classified memo slipped quietly into the hands of an anonymous European journalist, not through official channels, not for power, but as an act of quiet resistance. The journalist's report was short but explosive. Washington had pushed Europe to secretly prepare tariffs designed to choke Africa's oil and gold exports, forcing the continent to kneel in Ouagadougou. Ibrahim Traoré didn't see it as rumor. He saw it for what it was: a declaration of war on Africa's dignity. The revelation spread like wildfire. Within hours, whispers of the leaked memo rippled across African capitals. Headlines hit local newsrooms. Europe targets Africa's oil and gold. On social media, young voices asked the same question: how long will we let them dictate our future? In Ouagadougou, Ibrahim Traoré wasted no time. He summoned his advisors before dawn. The mood was tense but steady. "This isn't about tariffs," he said, his voice cutting through the silence. "This is about control. They want our oil, our gold, and our sovereignty. If we bow today, we'll be slaves tomorrow." By mid-morning, emergency calls went out across the Sahel, Mali, Guinea, and beyond. Traoré demanded a gathering not of diplomats, but of leaders who understood what was at stake. Within days, a closed summit was underway. Not in Paris, not in Geneva, but in the heart of West Africa. Behind heavy doors, the air was thick with defiance. Each leader spoke of the same pattern: gold siphoned out through shadow contracts, oil fields dominated by foreign firms, revenues disappearing overseas while villages remained in poverty. For the first time in decades, the conversation shifted. It was no longer about begging for aid. It was about standing together. And Traoré set the tone. "If they dare impose tariffs, then we will dare something greater. We will shut down the flow of oil and gold to their markets, and we will find new partners who respect us." The room fell into silence. Then, one by one, leaders nodded. The decision was risky, dangerous even. But in that moment, Africa's fractured voices began to converge into a single unyielding answer. News of the summit's decision leaked quickly, not through official communiques, but through the voices of ordinary people. Radio stations carried fragments of speeches, and soon the streets of Ouagadougou, Bamako, and Niamey were alive with chants. "If they want our oil and gold, they'll have to take our dignity, too." Markets buzzed with tension. Merchants whispered about the possibility of higher prices, about shortages that might come if Europe really raised tariffs. Farmers in dusty villages asked whether their harvests would still find buyers. Mothers worried about school fees, about medicine, about the thin line between survival and hunger. But something else burned beneath the fear: pride. For decades, Africans had watched their oil drilled away, their gold shipped out. While they were told to be grateful for loans and aid, now for the first time, their leaders were daring to say no. In Ouagadougou's Independence Square, a young student held a sign that read, "Better to endure hunger for a year than slavery for a century." The crowd roared in agreement. Traoré understood the cost. He knew that freezing exports would tighten belts across the continent. Yet, when he appeared on national television, his words resonated deeper than any promise of comfort. "We may suffer in the short term, but suffering with dignity is better than living forever on our knees." And in that moment, something remarkable happened. People who once felt powerless began to see themselves as part of a greater struggle across Africa. The whisper turned into a chorus. "Stand firm! We are with you!" The shock inside Europe was immediate and undeniable. Markets that had long considered African resources as background noise suddenly realized they were staring into an abyss. In Frankfurt, traders watched gold prices climb like a rocket, their screens flashing red with each uptick. In Paris, energy planners quietly admitted that more than half of the uranium powering France's nuclear grid came from Niger, a lifeline now under question. And in Milan, executives from Europe's electric car industry gathered in a panic without cobalt and lithium from the Congo. Their factories would stall, their green revolution collapsing before it could even take root. But the most dangerous pressure point of all was oil and gold. African oil drawn from wells in the Sahel and shipped through the Gulf of Guinea kept Mediterranean refineries alive. African gold, much of it flowing through Burkina Faso and Mali, underpinned the financial security of entire banking systems. These two commodities were not luxuries. They were oxygen. And now Traoré had placed his hand firmly on the valve. In Brussels, ministers scrambled into late-night meetings. For years, they had spoken in public about partnership, about aid, about shared growth. Yet, the memos on their desks told a different story, one of dependency. Europe needed Africa far more than Africa needed Europe. And for the first time in decades, everyone in the room knew it. Inside the closed chambers of Brussels, the debate turned raw. Washington's voice dominated the call screens, insisting that Europe must stand united behind tariffs and financial restrictions. Africa will crawl back. One American advisor declared once their treasuries run dry. But the Europeans in the room did not all nod. Some stared at graphs showing refinery shutdowns, bullion shortages, and cobalt contracts already slipping into Chinese hands. They knew that punishing Africa could boomerang with devastating speed. A German minister raised the first note of dissent. "Sanction them, and we sanction ourselves. Our auto industry cannot survive without Congale's cobalt. Our grids cannot run without Nish's uranium." His words hung heavy, but he did not dare push further. To openly oppose Washington's line would be political suicide. So instead, whispers of doubt spread quietly in corridors, never entering the official transcript. Meanwhile, opposition parties across Europe smelled blood. In Berlin, lawmakers asked why ordinary workers should pay the price of a tariff war against Africa. In Paris, unions warned of layoffs if gold markets were disrupted. Even in London, commentators on late-night programs began asking the unthinkable: have we underestimated Africa's power? But Trump's voice thundered above it all. At rallies broadcast globally, he promised to teach Africa its place, framing the crisis as a test of Western dominance. The crowd roared in approval, but diplomats listening abroad heard something different: the sound of a global order cracking under the weight of its own arrogance. As Europe wrestled with its divisions, BRICS nations moved with silent precision. In Beijing, trade officials announced emergency credit lines for African exporters, bypassing Western banks entirely. Moscow sent delegations offering joint ventures in gold refining and oil drilling, promising that no tariff could touch a barrel once it was rebranded under Eurasian contracts. New Delhi stepped forward with perhaps the boldest gesture: a pledge to purchase Sahelian crude in long-term agreements, guaranteeing a market even if Europe turned its back. Each step sent a clear signal: Africa would not stand alone. In Ouagadougou, these offers arrived like lifelines. Yet Traoré and his allies in the alliance of Sahel states were cautious. They understood the stakes. Accepting outside deals too quickly could simply replace one dependency with another. So they moved deliberately. Teams of economists and engineers were dispatched to secure stockpiles of oil and gold. Border troops fortified mining zones, ensuring no sabotage could choke supply at its source. And in the heart of the summit, leaders began drafting a framework not for survival, but for sovereignty, an African resource charter that would treat oil, gold, and other raw materials not as commodities, but as instruments of independence. For decades, Africa had been forced to react, begging for aid, scrambling under sanctions, adjusting to terms set elsewhere. Now, for the first time, the continent was setting the rules of engagement.